Sign it, Dad. If you don't sign it tonight, they'll strip everything by morning. Nolan Mercer shoved the folder across the stainless steel table hard enough to rattle the coffee cups. His knuckles were split. His tie hung loose. Rain ran down the diner window behind him in silver blades. I looked at the papers, then at the son who had once sent me to prison with a steady voice and borrowed tears. You already took 2 years from me, I said. And now you came for my name again? He swallowed. I came because you're the only thing I have left. I smiled for the first time that night. That, I told him, is exactly why you should be afraid. If you're still here, tell me in the comments. Would you open that folder, or slide it right back? The first free meal I ate as a released man tasted like burnt bacon, weak coffee, and unfinished business. I remember that because freedom never arrives the way people imagine it. There was no choir in the sky over Graterford, no dramatic wind lifting my jacket as the gates opened, no feeling of instant peace. The morning smelled like wet pavement, diesel exhaust, and the inside of an old transport van. My property bag cut into my fingers. My shoulders hurt from sleeping on a mattress, thin as cardboard, for 731 nights. My left knee still clicked in cold weather from an injury I got fixing a loading dock in 2017. And the wedding band I should have stopped wearing 2 years earlier sat in my pocket like a piece of evidence no jury had ever asked to see. The correctional officer at release had a face like folded paper, and the patience of a dead battery. Mercer Elias, sign here. I signed. Initial here. I initialed. Cash count $84. He pushed the envelope at me without looking up, as if he were returning a library book, and not 2 stolen years of a man's life. I tucked the envelope into my jacket, picked up the bag, and walked out into a Pennsylvania morning the color of dirty aluminum. Standing beyond the gate was the only person I wanted to see and the last person I expected to cry. Reggie Sloan leaned against a dark blue pickup with one hand on the hood and one hand over his mouth like he was trying to hold something together. Reggie was 6'3", broad through the chest, gray at the temples, and built like somebody had shaped him out of old bridge steel. I'd known him since we were both apprentices at the shipyard on the Delaware River. He had once stitched his own hand in a work trailer because he didn't want to lose overtime. He had laughed through a broken rib. He had buried his wife without letting his knees buckle. Reggie Sloan did not cry, but his eyes were wet when he saw me. Eli. That one word nearly took me down harder than prison ever had. He stepped forward, grabbed the back of my neck, pulled me into his chest, and hit my shoulder twice with the heel of his hand the way men do when they love each other too much to say it cleanly. You look like hell, he said. I was going for presidential. He barked one short laugh, wiped his face with the back of his wrist, and took the property bag from me without asking. Truck's warm, I got coffee. The coffee had my name on the lid in black marker. Eli. Not Mr. Mercer. Not Elias. Eli. My throat tightened so fast I had to look away. Reggie didn't crowd me with questions. That was one of the reasons our friendship had survived marriages, layoffs, funerals, and all the years in between. He drove the way he always drove, steady, one hand at 12 o'clock. No radio, no pointless noise. The truck smelled like motor oil, peppermint gum, and the cedar air freshener his daughter kept hanging from the mirror, no matter how much he pretended to hate it. He waited until we were 20 minutes south on I-476 before he spoke. Nolan called. The highway kept moving under us. Gray sky, wet road. Tractor trailers, spraying dirty mist into the next lane. When? Yesterday. Then twice this morning. I kept my eyes on the window. Did he ask how prison food was? Reggie glanced at me once. He asked what time you were getting released. And I told him I didn't know. But you did know. I did. I nodded. That was enough. Reggie had chosen correctly. For a while the truck filled with engine noise and rain. I watched warehouses, gas stations, dead winter grass, the backs of chain restaurants, and all the ordinary things I had dreamed about for 2 years, because prison makes the regular world look holy. Then Reggie said, "He's in trouble." I laughed without humor. That's a broad category. I mean real trouble. The company's collapsing. Investors are suing. He sold the condo on Rittenhouse in January, moved into a rental in Fishtown, then lost that too. He's been at an extended stay hotel near the airport for 3 weeks. I let that sit. And Savannah? I ask. Reggie's jaw tightened on her name. Gone. Not divorced. Not separated. Gone. Men our age know the difference. The last time I had seen my daughter-in-law, Savannah Mercer had stood in a courtroom with both hands wrapped around a tissue she never used and stared at the floor, while my son told 12 strangers I had shoved her against a stone kitchen island, that the stress and impact from my rage had caused her to collapse, that the fall led to the placental abruption that took her unborn daughter at 26 weeks. He had said it in a voice so controlled it sounded rehearsed. He had looked at me only once, and I had understood, in one awful flash, that a child can know exactly where to place the knife because he learned your ribs from the inside. Did he say what he wants? I asked. Reggie reached behind his seat with one hand and put a flat black folder on my lap. Wanted me to give you that first thing. I stared at it. My name was written across the front in Nolan's precise block letters, Elias Mercer. No, Dad. No apology. No trembling note. Just my name, printed like a label on a storage box. I didn't open it. I set it on the dashboard and watched the rain drag long, slanted lines across the windshield. The truck heater hummed. My coffee cooled between my hands. Somewhere around Conshohocken, I realized I had been clenching my jaw so hard it hurt. Reggie took me not to my old house because there was no old house anymore, but to the row home he'd bought 15 years earlier in South Philly, 3 blocks from Mifflin Square. Brick front, narrow steps, faded green door, a dent in the storm frame from when a teenage neighbor had crashed a bike into it in 2019 and never admitted it. Waiting on the porch was a woman in a camel coat with a legal pad balanced on one knee and a messenger bag at her feet. Mara Velez stood when she saw me. She was 42, sharp-eyed, controlled, and dressed like somebody who billed by the 6-minute increment. Mara had once been a forensic accountant for the U.S. Attorney's office before leaving for private litigation work. She was also Reggie's cousin, which meant she had the impossible combination of blood loyalty and professional restraint. Elias, she said, and hugged me once, briefly, firmly. Come inside. Don't open that folder yet. I looked at Reggie. He nodded once. Inside, the house was warm enough to make my face sting. There was tomato sauce on the stove. The Phillies schedule magnet still hung crooked on the fridge. Nothing in that kitchen belonged to the last 2 years, and for 10 dangerous seconds I wanted to stand there and do absolutely nothing except exist in a room that was not locked from the outside. Mara spread papers across the table. Nolan created an emergency transfer packet, she said. It names you as contingent controlling trustee over Mercer Therapeutics Holdings, and its remaining real property assets if he becomes insolvent, incapacitated, or unable to meet liquidity covenants. I stared at her. I'm going to need that again in English. She slid the black folder closer, but still kept her hand on it. 3 months before your conviction, Nolan transferred most of his voting rights and secondary ownership positions into a layered family trust. The language is drafted so that if certain financial triggers hit, authority can pass to the designated trustee without a public fight. That designated trustee is you. Reggie folded his arms. Your boy built himself a panic room and put the key in your pocket. I looked from one to the other. Why would he do that? Mara's expression changed by 1 degree. With some people, you never need more than a degree to know the floor just shifted. Because guilt makes smart people draft strange documents, she said, and because he thinks you're still the kind of man he can use. I opened the folder then. The stack inside was thick. Trust schedules, property lists, signature tabs, cover memorandum from a law firm on Walnut Street, a summary page highlighted in yellow. My eyes moved over asset lines I would once have thought belonged to someone else's world. Commercial lab lease in University City, minority stake in a cold storage facility in Camden, brokerage accounts drained to almost nothing, a brownstone shell in Northern Liberties under dispute, one unencumbered property still holding real equity, a historic warehouse conversion on the edge of Old City, mixed retail below, offices above, title held through a special purpose entity, estimated net equity after debt service and tax exposure, $1.9 million. That number sat on the paper like a dare. Why now? I asked quietly. Mara didn't answer right away. She flipped a page on her legal pad instead. Because I kept digging after Reggie told me what Nolan sent, and because what I found changes everything. She looked directly at me. Savannah's medical records never matched the story from trial. Something cold moved through my chest. Mara went on. The official testimony pinned the abruption on blunt force trauma from a domestic assault, with you as the aggressor. But the sealed maternal fetal consult from Jefferson notes severe catecholamine surge, elevated stimulant markers, and evidence of a fall pattern inconsistent with being pushed sideways into a counter. Reggie looked at the table, jaw working once. Mara's voice stayed calm. There was cocaine in Savannah's system, low but definite. The specialist note says second-hand exposure was possible, but close contact contamination was more likely. There are also text extracts and deleted recovery files from Nolan's old phone, suggesting he hosted private investor parties in the house for months. I didn't move. I didn't blink. For one long second, I could hear the hiss of the tomato sauce on the stove, and the old refrigerator, motor, and my own pulse in my ears. It wasn't me, I said, though I already knew that. It came out smaller than I wanted. It was never you, Mara replied. Reggie turned away then, one hand braced on the sink, shoulders locked. I looked at him. How long have you known? Not long enough, he said, still facing the window. And not before they took you. There are pains you can prepare for. There are pains you rehearse, file, label, contain. Then there are the ones that arrive late, after the event is already over, and rearrange the meaning of everything that came before. Knowing my son lied had put me in prison. Knowing exactly what he lied to hide made the walls feel closer all over again. I sat down because my knee gave a warning click, and because standing felt too much like tipping. Mara lowered her voice. There's more. The fetal loss wasn't the only thing buried. A private lender named Warren Pike filed notice of default 11 days ago against one of Nolan's entities. There's a hearing next week. If Nolan regains control over the trust assets before that hearing, Pike can reach them. If control transfers to you first, he can't touch what Nolan no longer controls. I looked at the property schedule again. Old City. Warehouse conversion. Real equity. The last clean piece on a sinking board. He wants me to sign him back into command before the sharks arrive. Yes, and if I don't? Mara's answer was immediate. He drowns. Silence settled over the kitchen. Reggie finally turned back, eyes redder than before. Eli, I sat in that courtroom and watched your boy bury you with my own 2 eyes. I still wake up hearing the sentence. So whatever you do next, do not do it because anybody in this house needs you to prove you're noble. He said it with the quiet force of a man trying to save me from my own habits. That hit harder than pity would have. I leaned back in the chair and stared at my son's neat, careful paperwork. Nolan had always been good with neat things. Good grades. Clean shoes. Precise language. Investor decks that made empty promises sound like inevitabilities. He was the kind of child teachers called gifted, and other parents called polite. I taught him to keep his tools in order. His mother taught him to write thank you notes. Somewhere along the way, he learned how to arrange a lie so beautifully people wanted to live in it. What happens if I take control? I asked. Mara slid one document forward. We file immediately. Quietly. If the court accepts the insolvency trigger, you become acting trustee over the remaining structure within 7 to 10 business days. And Nolan? He finds out too late. Reggie set a plate in front of me then. Eggs, toast, sausage. Like the body might need feeding before a man decides what to do with his child. I looked at the food and felt suddenly, violently hungry. That was the strange thing about release. The body keeps insisting on life, even when the heart is not done with ruin. I ate while Mara explained timelines. Nolan had built Mercer Therapeutics on borrowed glamour. Not fake science exactly, but inflated partnerships, exaggerated projections, vanity leases, and too many private dinners in rooms with bad men and expensive whiskey. He had married Savannah Keene because he loved her, or believed he did, and because her father's private equity connections opened doors faster than merit ever would. When the company's early data failed to impress the markets, Nolan widened the fraud in the oldest American way imaginable. More leverage, more image, more secrecy, more denial. The night Savannah lost the baby, there had been an investor party in the house in Gladwin. I had stopped by uninvited because Nolan had been dodging calls for 2 weeks and I was tired of being treated like a retired mechanic with no right to ask why strangers were parking Lamborghinis outside a house my son could not afford. We argued in the kitchen. Nolan had been wired tight, jaw twitching, pupils wrong. Savannah came in halfway through. Voices rose. Glass broke. She slipped near the back hall stairs. I lunged toward her. Nolan shouted. Security came running. By midnight, the story had changed shape. By morning, it had my fingerprints on it. By trial, it had become a polished narrative with motive, witnesses, and a grieving son brave enough to speak against his violent father. Juries love bravery when it wears the right suit. By the time I finished eating, I already knew what I would do. Not because revenge felt good. That's the fantasy people who haven't suffered properly still believe in. Revenge isn't heat. It's architecture. It's patience. It's deciding which beam to remove so the building collapses under the weight of its own lies. I want it done today, I said. Mara studied my face. You're sure? No, I said. I'm certain. She filed before noon. The next 8 days were so quiet they almost felt holy. That may sound wrong to people who think revenge should be loud, but loud is for amateurs. Quiet is where power does its best work. I slept in Reggie's spare room under a navy blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and cedar. I woke before sunrise every day because prison had trained my body to expect count, noise, metal, commands. Instead, I got birds on the windowsill, a plumber cursing 2 houses down, delivery trucks, and the slow resurrection of a neighborhood that had no idea a man was rebuilding his life in the smallest room on Titan Street. On day 2, I walked to Snyder Avenue alone and bought a razor, socks, and a winter cap. On day 3, I sat in a barber chair for the first real haircut I'd had in 2 years and watched pieces of prison fall onto a black cape at my knees. On day 4, I met with a union contact Reggie trusted about short-term inspection work. Nothing glamorous. Warehouse safety compliance. Dock equipment review. Honest labor. The kind that leaves your back sore and your conscience clean. On day 5, Nolan called Reggie's phone 6 times in one afternoon. Reggie never answered. On day 6, Mara came by with printed dockets and the kind of stillness she got when facts were arranging themselves into a weapon. Pike isn't the only one pressing him, she said. There's also an SEC inquiry tied to revenue recognition. Not criminal yet, but the walls are close. How close? She glanced at her notes. Close enough that he's trying to liquidate art he doesn't fully own and leverage an office building he no longer has clear title to. Good, I said. Then, because I was still me somewhere under all the damage, I asked, Savannah? Mara's mouth tightened. She's in North Carolina with her sister. No public statements. No cooperation with Nolan since the trial. She also hasn't moved to help you. I nodded once. Fair was a language nobody in this story spoke anymore. On day 7, I walked alone past the Delaware River and stood at a railing watching gray water slap pilings black with age. I tried to think of Nolan as a little boy and kept seeing him at 12 with a split lip from hockey, trying not to cry in front of me. I kept hearing him at 16 asking if ambition was the same thing as selfishness. I remembered telling him, ambition builds things, selfishness eats people. At the time I had thought that was a father's wisdom. Now it sounded like a warning I had issued too late. On the morning of day 8, Mara called at 8:12. It's done, she said. I was standing in Reggie's kitchen with coffee in one hand and a wrench in the other because his faucet had started dripping overnight and my hands still reached for repairs when my mind got too crowded. Say it again. The transfer orders recorded. Acting control vested this morning. Old City Mercantile Holdings now answers to Elias Mercer as trustee. The faucet kept dripping because I had stopped turning the wrench. When does Nolan learn? Mara exhaled softly. Probably in the most humiliating way available. That came the next day. Nolan had scheduled a private emergency session at a midtown law office with Warren Pike's counsel, a restructuring advisor, and 2 investors he was trying to keep from lighting the corpse of his company on fire. His whole strategy depended on pledging the Old City warehouse equity as proof that he still had a backbone of assets worth negotiating around. Mara had a contact in the room because of course she did. Some people collect art. Mara collected leverage. According to that contact, Nolan arrived in a charcoal coat, no tie, carrying the expensive leather portfolio he used when he wanted to look like the smartest man in the building. He let the lenders team talk first. He asked for 10 minutes. He offered bridge options, phased repayment, future licensing revenue, controlled liquidation, all the polished tricks of a man who had been lying at a professional level for years. Then Pike's lawyer opened the updated title packet, and the room changed. The warehouse was no longer controlled by Nolan Mercer or any of his proxy entities. It belonged, through the trust trigger he himself had drafted, to Elias Mercer. My name. On his paperwork. On his last real asset. The witness said Nolan didn't explode. That would have been easier to understand. He just went very still, as if the blood in him had decided not to be part of the meeting anymore. He tried calling me before the first recess, then during the second, then from the elevator, then from the sidewalk outside, in the freezing wind off Market Street. I watched his name flash on my phone 4 times while sitting in a booth at a diner near Broad and Christian, eating blueberry pancakes and reading the local paper like an elderly man with no interest in drama. I let every call ring out, not to punish him. Punishment had already been delivered the day he testified against me and mistook delay for escape. No, I let it ring because for the first time in 2 years, I wanted him to understand what unreachable felt like. That evening he came to Reggie's house. Not with a lawyer, not with a folder, with rain in his hair and panic all over his face. Reggie opened the door, saw who it was, and looked back toward the kitchen where I was sitting with Mara over a spread of trust documents and takeout containers. "He's here," Reggie said. Mara capped her pen. "Of course he is." I stood slowly. That was when the scene at the diner happened. Not the beginning of this story, though it could have been. Just the point where the knife came all the way out. Nolan had asked to meet somewhere neutral. I told him no. He had asked to talk alone. I told him no. He had asked for 10 minutes. I told him 15 because cruelty and precision should never get confused with each other. There's a 24-hour diner on Columbus Boulevard where nobody looks twice at men falling apart across a Formica table. That's where we went because public places reduce theatrics and because I wanted bright lights on his face when the truth finally found him. He was already inside when I walked in with Reggie behind me and Mara 2 steps back. He stood. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, though he had lost weight, but structurally, as if his confidence had been load-bearing and someone had taken a hammer to it. There were purple half-moons under his eyes. The expensive watch was gone. So was the wedding ring. "Dad, sit." He sat. The folder between us was the new one. Fresh. Urgent. Rebuilt from desperation. That was when he said, "Sign it, Dad. If you don't sign it tonight, they'll strip everything by morning." That was when I smiled. Now here's what people misunderstand about moments like that. The dramatic version would have me slam both hands on the table, tell him he was dead to me, dump every hidden record into his lap, and leave him shattered in public. But dramatic men rarely win. Controlled men do. So I opened the folder. Inside were transfer authorizations, emergency proxy reversals, a proposed indemnity letter, and a handwritten note clipped to the top page. "Please, I know I don't deserve it. I just need one chance to fix this. No signature, no love, no, your son. Just need, of course." I set the note aside. "Nolan," I said, "before we discuss your paperwork, we're going to discuss mine." His eyes flicked to Mara. He already knew she was trouble. Smart men can smell the person in the room who actually knows what happened. He tried a different voice then. Softer. Frayed. "I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" Reggie repeated from the booth behind me. His tone alone could have cracked tile. Nolan ignored him and looked at me. "The company got away from me. The lenders got aggressive. Savannah left. I know how this looks." I nearly laughed. "You know how this looks?" I asked. You stood under oath and told a jury I threw your pregnant wife into a stone counter. He swallowed. I know. You said I terrified her. I know. You watched them put handcuffs on me. His hands tightened on the edge of the table. I know. I leaned in then. Just enough that he had to meet my eyes. No, I said quietly. You remember, that is not the same thing as knowing. The diner noise moved around us, silverware, a coffee pot, somebody coughing near the register, the slap of tires on wet pavement outside. The whole world continuing, indifferent to a sun coming apart under fluorescent lights. Mara slid a sealed envelope toward him. What's that? He asked. The consult summary you thought stayed buried, she said. Jefferson, maternal. Fetal medicine. Toxicology annotations. Reconstruction notes on the fall trajectory. Metadata from the security system service request you deleted but didn't fully erase. He stared at the envelope without touching it. I watched the color leave his face in visible stages. You don't have to open it, Mara added. You already know what's inside. Nolan looked at me then with something like pleading and something like fear. I didn't mean for it to go that far. There it was, not denial. Not yet. Something weaker, more naked. The admission before the confession. How far were you aiming? I asked. His lips parted. Nothing came out. Did you mean for Savannah to walk through a house full of cocaine smoke while pregnant? I asked. Did you mean to scream at her in the back hall until she slipped? Did you mean to build a story overnight and pin it on me because your investors couldn't smell blood from the nursery? Dad, did you mean to visit me in prison exactly 0 times because seeing me behind glass might have interfered with your schedule? He looked down. Good. Let him. I had spent too long staring at concrete and steel in the backs of men's heads while my son enjoyed clean sheets and investor dinners. Shame looked better on him than confidence ever had. I was trying to save everything, he said at last. No, I replied. You were trying to save yourself from the version of the story where you were the problem. That hit. I could see it. He ran both hands over his face, then let them drop. Savannah wanted to leave me months before the trial. She said the house felt toxic. She said I was different. I thought if I could just get one licensing deal through, one bridge round, 1/4 of clean numbers, everything would settle. And when it didn't, he stared at the coffee cup between us. The night she fell, she started yelling that she was done, that she was calling her sister. You came in. You started on me. Security heard yelling. There was broken glass. When the doctors started asking questions, my lawyer said, Your lawyer said what? That if the state thought there was domestic violence in the family, it would explain everything. Reggie made a sound low in his throat, something between disgust and restraint. I never took my eyes off Nolan. So you let them point at me. He nodded once. Not even a whole nod. Barely movement. But enough. The body has strange ways of reacting when a nightmare finally admits its own name. I had imagined triumph. I had imagined righteous heat. What I felt instead was fatigue so deep it made my bones seem old. Because confession doesn't restore stolen time. It only proves the theft. Nolan looked up again. I'm sorry. I believed him. That was the worst part. Not because belief made him innocent. It didn't. But because sincere regret from a guilty person can be uglier to carry than a lie. Lies are simple. Regret asks you to remember the human shape of the person who ruined you. He slid the folder an inch closer. Please, if Pike closes in tomorrow, I lose the last building. If that happens, the SEC inquiry becomes a feeding frenzy. They'll subpoena everything. I can still unwind some of this if you transfer authority back. I can sell the warehouse myself, cover Pike, buy time, maybe settle with the others. Maybe, Mara repeated, flat as a blade. Nolan ignored her. I know you hate me. You should. But if you do this, I can at least keep some control. I can stop this from becoming public. That sentence told me more than the rest of the conversation put together. There it was again. Not family. Not repentance. Control. He was still trying to negotiate the size of his own ruin. I sat back and folded my hands. You want the warehouse, I said. I want a chance to fix what I broke. No. You want the warehouse because it's the only thing in your life that still looks like dignity on paper. He flinched. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because fathers are still dangerous when they finally stop protecting. I took out my reading glasses and unfolded a different packet Mara had brought. Nolan frowned. What is that? A lease commitment, I said. He stared. I set the top page in front of him. Mercantile Development Cooperative. Letter of intent. Adaptive reuse proposal. Ground floor fabrication studio. Second floor trade classrooms. Non-profit apprenticeship offices. Shared workshop bays for veterans and reentry workers. His eyes moved across the page once, then back to me. What is this? This, I said, is what happens to the warehouse. He looked genuinely confused, which for one clean second felt better than anger. I don't understand. I know you don't. I took my time because time was finally mine again. 2 years ago, you used my name as a shield and my body as the cost of your lie. You thought prison would erase me and preserve your future. It didn't. The warehouse isn't going back to you. I'm keeping it. Mara's already formalized trustee control. Reggie's helping me talk to a cooperative that trains men coming out of prison, laid-off tradesmen, women re-entering the workforce, people who need somewhere to build with their hands before the world decides they're disposable. He stared as if I had started speaking Russian. You're serious. Completely. You'd turn my last asset into a charity? That word sharpened something in me. No, I said. I'd turn your last asset into usefulness. Those are not the same thing. He sat there with rain-damp hair curling at the edges, eyes bloodshot, breathing like a man who had run farther than his legs were designed for. You can't do this, he said, but weakly, because he knew I already had. I can. I did. And tomorrow Pike gets whatever is left of your house of mirrors. He pushed back from the table then, not standing, just needing distance from the pages. You want me destroyed. That would have been easier. Cleaner. Less exhausting. I looked at him for a long moment. No, I said. Destroyed men are simple. You don't get simple. You get to stay alive and look at what you did. He closed his eyes. Reggie stood, but didn't come closer. He didn't need to. His presence had its own weight. Mara spoke next, calm and merciless in the way only precise people can be. There is one thing Elias is still giving you. Nolan opened his eyes again. She pushed a final envelope toward him. Inside was a signed declaration. Not transferring control. Not restoring his title. Not rescuing him. A sealed statement from me confirming I had no intention of forwarding the toxicology and consult package to the press, to investors, or to Savannah's family, unless compelled by subpoena. I had chosen that before the diner. Not out of softness, because some fires spread farther than the arsonist deserves. Nolan read it once and looked stunned. You'd protect me? Don't insult me, I said. I'm protecting the dead child from becoming a public footnote in your business collapse, and I'm protecting whatever remains of Savannah's privacy. You are an incidental beneficiary of my restraint. Learn the difference. He folded in on himself then, elbows on knees, one hand over his mouth. For a second he looked 20 years old. For a second he looked 5. For a second he looked exactly like the boy who used to crawl into the passenger seat of my truck after Little League games and ask if I was disappointed in him before I'd even spoken. That nearly got me. Nearly. But memory without discipline is just another trap, he said through his hand. I don't know how to come back from this. I believe that too. And because I had once loved being his father more than almost anything in this world, I answered him honestly. You don't come back by getting the building, I said. You come back by telling the truth when it costs. By meeting the people you lied to without a lawyer in front of you. By saying my name in public the way you said it in court. By surviving the loss of control without inventing another victim. By being small for once. Very small. He didn't look up. I can't survive Pike tomorrow. Yes, you can. No. You can survive losing money. You can survive losing your company. You can survive sleeping in a room you hate. You can survive people seeing who you are. What you mean is you can't survive it while still feeling important. That landed dead center. His shoulders shook once. Just once, then held. The waitress came by with a fresh coffee pot and paused, reading the weather in our booth in one glance the way diner waitresses do after 40 years around divorce papers, layoffs, affairs, and funerals. "Anybody need a warm-up?" she asked. Reggie said, "Please," as if we were discussing the Eagles. The normalcy of it nearly made me laugh. That was the final turn of the blade, in a way. Not shouting, not spectacle. Just the world refusing to stop because one man's lies had finally matured into consequences. Nolan lifted his head slowly. "If I tell the truth now..." He couldn't finish. "You should have told it then," I said. "I know. That's the first accurate sentence you've said to me in 2 years." He nodded. We sat with that. Then he reached for the folder he'd brought and closed it himself. He didn't push it toward me again. That mattered. People think redemption arrives with grand speeches. Usually it starts much smaller, with a guilty person finally understanding that begging is not the same thing as being owed. When we got up to leave, he stood too. "Dad." I waited. "I did love her," he said, "and I loved the baby. There are lies, half-lies, and the tragic truths guilty people still get to keep." I believed that one. Love had never been his clean problem. Cowardice was. "I know," I said. He looked like the answer hurt more than if I had called him a monster. "Good. Monsters are easy. Sons are harder." We walked out into the rain. Reggie went to start the truck. Mara stayed under the awning, giving me exactly enough distance to say what had to be said and not an inch more. Nolan stood on the wet sidewalk with his collar up and his hands useless at his sides. "You'll hear from Pike's lawyers tomorrow," I said. "You'll hear from the SEC eventually. And if you have any instinct left for self-preservation, you'll stop hiding evidence, stop scrubbing phones, stop trying to sell things that aren't yours, and stop telling yourself this happened because the world is cruel." Rain traced down his face. For one ugly second it looked like tears. Maybe it was both. "What if I come by?" he asked. "Reggie's. To talk. Then come with no papers." His eyes flicked up. "No asks, no structures, no terms." I said, "If you come empty-handed and tell the truth until there's nothing left in you that can rearrange it." He nodded slowly. I got into Reggie's truck without offering him a hug, a handshake, or forgiveness. The door shut between us with a sound I felt in my chest. As we pulled away, I looked back once. He was still standing there in the rain, not chasing us, not calling, not performing despair for effect. Just standing. Sometimes that is the first honest thing a person does. The next morning, Pike got his judgment. The warehouse stayed mine. Mercer Therapeutics unraveled exactly the way bad structures do. Faster than the architect expects and slower than the spectators hope. Vendor claims surfaced. Emails surfaced. Revenue games surfaced. No headline named me. No reporter called my phone. Mara had built enough walls around the trust transfer to keep my part of the story out of the feeding frenzy, and I thanked her for that with the kind of gratitude people earn only when they help drag your life back from a cliff. Within 6 weeks, the lease letter on the warehouse became a signed development agreement. Within 3 months, I was standing inside the stripped first floor wearing a hard hat, work boots, and the old knee brace I hated, listening to demo crews tear out decorative nonsense. Nolan had installed to impress biotech tourists who were never going to stay. The bones of the place were good. Thick beams, honest brick, natural light from high industrial windows. A freight elevator that complained like an old union man but still did its job. Reggie handled contractors like he had been born for it. Mara handled structure and compliance like she could bend bureaucracy with eye contact. I handled what I had always handled best. The physical truth of things. Wiring runs, safety plans, drainage angles, tool lists, floor loads, apprenticeship layouts. The 1,000 small decisions that turn a dead building into a place where people can work without getting crushed by somebody else's vanity. The first class we accepted included 8 people. A welder out of Chester trying to come back after a possession sentence. A woman from Kensington who had spent 4 years caring for her mother and couldn't get anyone to look past the gap on her resume. A former army mechanic with panic disorder. 2 brothers who had aged out of foster care and knew more about surviving systems than using them. a 50-year-old drywall finisher whose hands still shook from detox, a 19-year-old who had never owned his own toolbox, a man named Luis who came home from state prison with exactly one duffel bag and a level of quiet I recognized immediately. When I handed Luis the key to his assigned locker, then our fingers brushed, and he looked at me the way released men look at each other when they realize no explanation is necessary. That was when I knew the payoff had already happened. Not in the diner. Not in the judgment. Not in Nolan's face when he learned the building was gone. Here. In usefulness. In taking the cleanest surviving piece of his lie and turning it into something his lie could never produce. Nolan came by for the first time in late August. No papers, no suit, no watch. He wore jeans, a plain jacket, and the kind of expression a man has when he finally stops expecting the room to make itself easier for him. Reggie spotted him first through the glass office door and looked at me without speaking. I set down the conduit plan I'd been marking and went to meet my son in the shell of the warehouse he used to call a strategic asset. He looked around at the open framing, the welding booths going in, the painted safety lines on the floor, the tool cages, the chalkboard schedule, the half-finished sign near the entrance. Mercer Works. Trade. Training. Second chances. He stared at the name for a while. "You kept Mercer," he said. "It's mine, too." He nodded. "Fair enough." We walked the perimeter slowly. He asked no questions about finances. None about tax treatment. None about salvage value. He did not once ask what the building might have sold for. That mattered too. At the far end, near the loading bay, he stopped and said, "I told Savannah." I said nothing. She didn't answer for a day. Then she called. I told her all of it. The party, the drugs in the house, the lawyer, the trial strategy, me choosing you. His voice thinned on the last two words. I let the silence do what silence does when nobody interrupts it to feel kinder. "What did she say?" I asked. "That I don't get to use grief as camouflage anymore." I almost admired her for that. He stared out through the open bay door toward the street. I filed a sworn correction through counsel. It doesn't fix the conviction record automatically, but Mara said it helps your petition. There it was. The thing I had not asked him for because asked truth is always weaker than volunteered truth. My pulse kicked once. "You filed it?" He nodded. "Last week." I looked away because the room blurred for a second, and I refused to let my son see me rebuild in real time. It took another 11 months for the court to vacate the conviction. 11 months of filings, hearings, affidavits, chain of custody fights, prosecutorial embarrassment, and slow institutional reluctance. Systems do not like admitting they were fooled. They like admitting they were incomplete even less. But at 10:14 a.m. on a Thursday in July, a judge with tired eyes and a reputation for precision signed the order. Conviction vacated. Record corrected. Petition for full exoneration granted. Mara squeezed my forearm once under counsel table. Reggie sat in the back row with both hands clasped so tight I thought he might break them. Nolan was there too. Not beside me. Not behind me. Just there, in the second row, where a witness to damage belongs. When we stepped out into the courthouse light, reporters were waiting for another case and ignored us completely. I loved that. No cameras. No public redemption package. No slow-motion embrace for strangers. Just sun on stone steps, traffic noise, and the unbearable simplicity of my own name being mine again. Reggie hugged me first. Hard. Brief. Real. Mara said, "Took them long enough." Then Nolan stepped closer and stopped. He looked older than the year before. Not ruined. Not dramatic. Just carved down. More honest in the face somehow. Less polished. More expensive things lost. More necessary things finally visible. "I'm glad," he said. "I know that's too small, but it's true." "It is too small," I answered. He nodded. "I know." We stood there with the city moving around us. Some endings arrive like explosions. Others arrive like a lock, finally turning after you stop trusting the key. That night, after everyone left, I stayed alone in the warehouse office until dark. The building had mostly finished humming by then, HVAC cycling, a distant drill put away, metal settling into evening. Through the glass I could see rows of benches, helmets hung in order, lockers painted navy, welding curtains folded back, the chalkboard wiped clean for the next morning's class. I sat at the desk Nolan once would have called inefficient, and looked at the framed copy of the exoneration order Mara had dropped there without asking. 2 years stolen. Name restored. Building repurposed. Truth late, but alive. On the corner of the desk sat a small cardboard box I recognized instantly. Nolan had left it with Reggie earlier that afternoon. No note attached. Inside was my old watch, the one that disappeared from evidence property during intake and somehow never made it back into the envelope on release day. I turned it over in my hand. The crystal was scratched. The leather strap needed replacing. The second hand still moved. At the bottom of the box was a single folded card. Dad, I found this in the lockbox with the trial prep files. I should have returned it 2 years ago. I should have done most things 2 years ago. N. No plea. No speech. No request. Better. I put the watch on. It ticked against my wrist, like time had finally decided to walk beside me instead of over me. Outside, a truck passed. Somewhere down the block, a siren rose and faded. The city kept doing what cities do, swallowing shame, carrying noise, making room for work. That was the payoff people never talk about, because it doesn't fit on a thumbnail. The real revenge was not watching Nolan lose his company. It was watching him live long enough to understand why he deserved to. The real revenge was not making him beg in a diner. It was turning the last clean piece of his collapsing empire into a place where men and women the system had already written off could learn a trade, earn a wage, and walk back into their own names with their shoulders up. The real revenge was this. He used my name to bury me. Now my name hangs over a door that lets other people come back alive. And every morning when I unlock that warehouse, I touch the sign once before I step in. Mercer Works. Mine. Not because he gave it to me, because I survived him. And on certain mornings, just before first shift, when the light comes in low through the high windows and catches the dust like gold, I can almost hear prison closing behind me for good. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment with the line that hit hardest, and follow for the next one waiting in the dark.